Hello, and welcome to our latest installment in the UXDX online series. I hope you're really excited for the event that we have tonight. I know I am. I'm really looking forward to the talks. But before we jump into those, I want to give a very quick introduction to UXDX and why we host these sessions. So, our mission at UXDX is to help companies become more innovative, become more efficient, and become more sustainable. And the way we do that is by helping companies shift from building software using waterfall projects to empowered autonomous product teams. And the reason why that is kind of more efficient, effective, and sustainable is because if you're doing in a high change environment where you're constantly iterating on the same parts of your product, then it doesn't make sense to put in a team and then move them somewhere else, and all that knowledge goes with them. I've worked in some companies where there's 100 plus events going on or projects going on at any given time. So in that sense, it's more efficient to have people who really understand the customer, really understand the business needs, and can iterate and improve. And that's the product team kind of model. Now, it's really easy to say, oh, we'll just shift from projects to products, but it's really hard to do in practice because you're changing almost everything around not just how you build the software, but how you govern it and fund it and everything like that. So that's why we invite people to come and speak about how they're changing their part of the process. And you can learn how they're modifying or improving their ways of working. And hopefully, as that's going on, you're starting to think about your own context and some questions might come to mind. And that's great. So we always invite questions. You can put them in the panel on the right-hand side here if you're watching on uxdx.com, or in the chat on YouTube, LinkedIn, or whichever platform you're watching on. And we'll pass those questions on to the speakers. Sometimes we get too many questions that we can't answer in the time slot that we have today. So that's where the UXDX Slack group comes in. And we have a channel in there called Ask the Speakers. So anything that we don't get time to talk through this evening, we'll post those questions in there and we'll invite the speakers to come and answer them. But that's enough of an introduction. You're not here to see me talk on about UXDX. You're here to see our speakers. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker for this evening. And it's Cindy Brummer, who will be talking about how to get alignment with tough stakeholders. So welcome to the stage, Cindy.
Thanks so much. I am so glad to be here today, especially because dealing with stakeholders has been something that I've been going through for many, many years, both positive experiences and even negative ones. So, what I hope to share with you today is how to get ahead of that and how to not have negative experiences as much as possible. So, here's what I'm going to be covering. I'm going to talk about why stakeholders are tough. Maybe you'll be able to identify a little bit with that. I'm going to talk about the SCARF model for understanding why stakeholders are responding the way that they are to you. And we're going to talk about those methods for helping to get around that. So, some things like helping to increase their status, putting together a vision meeting, and why those techniques work, at least they have for me. And hopefully they'll be successful for you. And of course, questions are welcome throughout. So, just a little bit about me. I am the CEO and creative director of a user experience agency in Austin, Texas. And today I'm in San Antonio for a meeting. But welcome or thank you for here from Texas. I have a master's degree in UX design. I have been a contributor to the book 97 Things Every UX Practitioner Needs to Know. And I do all kinds of teaching around UX. So I've been doing this for many, many years. And my company, Standard Beagle, we're a UX design agency. We do strategy, we do research, and we do product design. So just a little bit about us. We've been doing many projects lately on the enterprise and mid-level company level. So a lot of my experience comes from that level of stakeholder. So first of all, the tough stakeholder. Maybe this will bring some memories to your mind or maybe some fear of anticipating that. When we're in the middle of a project and we're dealing with a tough stakeholder, we are often like, why is this happening? Why is this happening to me? Or we get angry and we think, God, why can't they just let me do my job? I just want to be able to do the best job I can. And we can see the danger coming. we foresee that there could be some sort of disaster on the horizon, which could make the project unsuccessful, or at least make it a miserable experience for us. And when it is a miserable experience, we kind of feel like this is happening to us. We're flipping around and landing in the mud. Whether or not the project is successful, this is still what we're going through in terms of anxiety and having to deal with someone who's not very open and amenable to the work that we're accomplishing for them, whether they be a VP at our own company or a client that we're working with. And that is what happened to me with a client I had last summer. And we're going to call him Fred, because obviously I don't want to reveal his real name. But Fred was a really tough stakeholder. And the thing is that I've dealt with lots and lots of tough stakeholders, but this one really caught me by surprise. I was on a research project, and I was working with another agency on this. And things started off feeling good. He was very excited about the work we were doing, but then things started to change. And I could feel it happening, and it didn't feel good. What happened was that all of a sudden he became much more disconnected. He started staying off camera for our check-in meetings. There were lots and lots of people on the calls, so he would just stay off and he would just stay very quiet. But on the backside, as we were preparing lists for reaching out to potential participants for user interviews, he started to micromanage the process. And I could feel from his tone that he was getting really frustrated with it. And he started to question the findings themselves. So I was bringing the findings to them and telling them this is what the data is showing, he was questioning severely, and it felt like he was trying to trip me up in those meetings and make me look bad in front of all the other people on the team. And at the very end of the project, there was no positive feedback from him. He almost seemed disappointed that we were able to successfully give the results that we were. That's a tough stakeholder, and that's tough to get around. And the thing is that I saw it coming, but I didn't see it coming. I missed those signs of trouble. And now that I'm reflecting back on it, there were some definite things that I've seen throughout my career that I should have known, I should have said something and acted. Because I've had a number of observations about stakeholders, especially the ones that are going to be trouble. My first observation is that these are the ones that are critical. These are the ones that are very negative about what's happening with the project. They are, trying to bring everybody down, or they're pointing out the shortcomings. It doesn't feel good to be in meetings with them because of the criticism that you're receiving. And there's also seems to be a lack of buy-in. It could be initially with the start of the project, or it could be mid-project, which is even worse because you thought everything was going well, and then things start to go awry and the communication is poor. And you know that all of a sudden they've lost faith in what you're doing. And the problem is that they can influence others. And this is my third observation. They are actually telling other people that the work isn't going the way that it should, even though it might be. And it feels really unfair as the person who's completing the work to have to deal with someone who's spreading what could be untruths about it. So the question becomes, why? We could chalk it up to say this person's a jerk or this person just doesn't like me. But honestly, there's something deeper there. And that's what I want to go through here. I want to talk about how the human brain reacts. And this is where the SCARF model comes in. Every human has a basic set of needs. And this is beyond the hierarchy of needs that we all have learned about. These are the things that the brain is constantly judging us, our relationship with other people about: status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. These 5 things we're always doing with each other, with, no matter what the interaction is, it is always happening, and we're not always consciously aware of it. And with stakeholders in particular, I've found that the 3 that are bolded here, status, certainty, and relatedness, are the ones that most often come into play when you're dealing with a tough stakeholder. So let me explain what that means. Now, status. Our preference is to have a social kind of status or hierarchy where we're higher than others. I know that sounds really egotistical, but that's what fuels us. We are constantly dealing with a threat of status or a reward of status. Reward being if we feel higher than someone else, a threat being when we feel like we're going lower. And people will react very negatively when they feel their status is being threatened. Now, if you think about even just interactions that you've had in the past week, if you think about when someone has, burst out at you or maybe, said some things that kind of made you feel less than, that usually is an underlying response of status. Somebody is, trying to make themselves be higher on the social pecking order, because social pain like rejection or exclusion, these are things that are activating the pathways in our brain that are the same as physical pain. So status is really important. Now, another one is certainty. This is where humans want to feel like something is going to be certain ahead, or clarity. And time again, studies have shown that humans will make choices that are financially not going to be beneficial to them because they want to feel certain about something. So that feeling of uncertainty, this is really important. Now, this is shorn up by the book Thinking Fast and Slow, the study by Daniel Kahneman. You can read about his study about like people like choosing the poor choice with certainty over, the one that would give them more reward in the future. This is all a brain pattern. We want to feel certain, we want to feel safe. And then the third piece of the stakeholder puzzle is relatedness. As humans, our brains want to feel a connection or to other people. We want to feel like we're part of a group, we're part of some sort of cohesive team. And when we feel that way, there is reward that is generated in our brain, and we want to keep it coming. Now, when there's an absence of relatedness, this is generating a threat response. And so, when we're thinking about how we relate to other people, if we feel excluded, we're going to react in a negative way. Now, all of these things that I just talked about came from this amazing book that I've read. It's called Your Brain at Work, and it's by Dr. David Rock. So, if you want to read more about the SCARF model and these principles, I highly recommend it. This has totally changed the way that I think about my interactions with my family, but especially at work and dealing with stakeholders. So, if we think about things in terms of status and certainty and fairness, and we think about like how do we make sure that our stakeholders feel rewarded instead of threatened, what can we do? Well, here's a great quote that I've pulled from that book. Many great leaders understand intuitively that they need to work hard to create a sense of safety in others. And that's the piece. We want to generate a sense of safety. Sometimes that means that we're going to have to do things that go against what, where our own threat response is going to come into play. But that's what we have to do. So when we think about status and the stakeholder, we want to increase a person's sense of status by doing something to help them feel like they're being rewarded. So one way we can do this is by publicly recognizing them. What that does is that generates that positive reward, and the benefit is that it can resonate for years and years. Now, certainty also important, and we can help people have a better, sense of certainty by giving them a bit larger understanding of the big picture itself. So when we provide access to more information, this helps put our stakeholders' minds at ease. And then relatedness. We want people to be able to connect with us as stakeholders so that they can feel part of the team and that they belong. So when we are meeting with them, if we can allow more time for casual conversation or more opportunities to participate with the team, this really helps increase that sense of relatedness. So We can focus this though, instead of doing casual, like, hey, try this, hey, try this. There are actual methods that we can try and bring this into our processes as researchers and designers in order to bring more alignment from our stakeholders. So let's talk about managing status a little bit more, because this is probably the one that I run into the most. In fact, every time I hear about, oh, these people are kind of like quibbling with each other, usually it has to do with a sense of status. And if I think back on what happened with Fred last summer, his status felt threatened. He thought that I was threatening it somehow, and I don't remember how, but I made him feel less than. And he was reacting to that. Now, it could have been, how I presented the material. It could have been that I didn't defer to him enough on calls. It could have been, something that I wasn't even aware of, that, some other boss was in the room. I don't know, but definitely his status felt threatened. And this is where we need to be aware of hierarchy. Status is absolutely relative. How we feel about our status regarding other people is relative to the different situations that we're in. So I was coming in as an outsider, as a vendor to a company that had an already kind of political, not political, but like there were corporate politics going on. And these corporate politics include having a pecking order. And so the individuals that were at play there, there was already some sort of hierarchy in place. And then I was being inserted into it for a project. So that messed everything up. So being aware of that is really important. So what some of the things I could have done was I could have given a stroke. Now, a stroke is something like a compliment. It makes us feel good, like oh, thank you so much for, clarifying that point. Or, I really appreciate you providing that a perspective. It doesn't have to be, oh, you're the best person in the world. It just has to be enough to kind of defer. So that stroke really helps. And I could have done that. I could have also provided what I call a third party story. I could have given examples of how I've worked with other companies and kind of shown how I left that, corporate, politic hierarchy in place without threatening it, and given him some sense of ease about it. Another thing I could have done was I could have asked questions of Fred and kind of brought him to the point where he was coming up with an idea that I had kind of given him, but he felt like it was, he could have felt like it was his own. The thing here is that you want to be super careful. You're not trying to let them steal your idea per se. So there's a very careful line to walk here. But the idea is that we feel greater sense of status when we come up with our ideas on our own and somebody isn't just telling us to do something, because that feels threatening. And my favorite version part of like increasing status is to get uncomfortable intentionally. This is when we do something that kind of makes us look a little vulnerable. Maybe we're not all together all the time. Every time somebody sees that, they kind of feel a little bit better. So I heard a great story about this regarding a salesperson, and the way that he would kind of get uncomfortable, intentionally when he was talking with a potential client, was that he would, you know, go to find his pen and it was always missing. And he always had to borrow a pen. Oh my God, I forgot my pen. Can I borrow your pen? And the client or the potential client would think, oh my God, who's this person that doesn't have a pen? But it worked really well because it helped increase their status and it didn't make him look like he was an idiot or something like that. Just enough of being uncomfortable intentionally. Now, in terms of managing certainty and relatedness, there's all sorts of things that you can do, but there's one method that I love using, and it actually even helps with the status response. And this is a method I use with a big meeting, a vision meeting. So with Fred, he lacked the certainty and the relatedness. I'm sure that he thought that the his idea, his vision of how the project would go would be one way, but when the data took us a completely different way and it started going in a different direction, I'm pretty sure that he stopped feeling that certainty and he stopped feeling like he was being part of the team. I was a stranger. He just didn't know me. So there was an absence of this relatedness. Now, if I could go back in time, get in my time machine and see what I could do, what I would have tried to do is create a vision meeting with him, not just a kickoff call, but an actual brainstorm and same page meeting. The nice thing about one of these types of meetings, and I'll explain the structure in just a second, is that it provides big picture. So this helps with certainty. It fosters, team relatedness, and there's idea creation from everyone. And that brings in the status piece. And then some other benefits to it is that when you have a vision meeting and you're creating it like with a whiteboard scenario, you're equalizing the voices. You don't have one person that is speaking and then everybody else falls in place. It reverses the influence. So it allows everybody to have influence and it doesn't, make it topsy-turvy in terms of one voice, doing it for everyone else. And then you really earn that buy-in. People feel like they're contributing and they're getting in there and they're feeling like they're involved. So they're really bought into the process. So in terms of creating it, the key ideas here are making sure that the folks that are involved in this meeting are all the key players. You don't want to have everybody like from the company, so 100 people would be way too many, but the key people, the key stakeholders, the key team members that need to be there. And what you're going to do is create structured exercises for them to move through. Now, you also need to make sure that there's strong facilitation so that someone is there guiding the process throughout and that they're enforcing this idea of being silent together. So you're working and creating ideas silently and then coming together as the group. And so this is an example of a vision meeting that I did a few years ago, pre-COVID, with a health district, and we were coming up with a vision for a new web property for this company. They're going in a different direction. There were lots of different voices from different departments that are at play, and I really wanted to make sure that we were going to all be on the same page for how I was going to move forward. And as a result of going through this process in this meeting with them, they were very bought in. Even the toughest stakeholder, the head of marketing, was all bought into it. And I didn't get any backlash at all through the rest of the project. So it resonated throughout. So here's the method for doing one of these vision meetings. First of all, at the beginning of the project, make sure that everybody knows that they're going to be part of this. Get everybody, just make sure it's part of the agenda. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to start the meeting by building rapport. You don't want to just launch into the exercises. You want to make sure that everybody feels comfortable. So that icebreaker is going to be really important. And they also need to feel like, like the direction of the meeting. So having an agenda is important. And then you're going to do a whiteboard exercise. So this will be the piece where the facilitator comes in more strongly and is making sure that they're all working together and capturing those ideas. And the nice thing about doing it this way is that it's dead simple. I mean, honestly, it's an affinity diagram, and you're able to bring together everybody else and make that work visible. It also promotes that critical thinking. So just kind of go through this as an example of what one might look like. One idea here, though, is that selecting that facilitator is key. You absolutely need to do it. And that person needs to be a listener, they need to have presence, and they need to be objective. So make sure you choose them. And if it's not going to be you, it needs to be someone that you feel would have these capabilities. You need to make sure that you're giving yourself enough time. Just like I'm looking at the clock now, make sure that I give myself enough time for questions. You also want to make sure that you're not inviting like too many people. I would say that a good size is somewhere between 7 and 12 people. Any more, and it just becomes way harder to manage. A nice quiet conference room, like one I'm in right now, or you could do it in an office if you're doing it remotely, and make sure that you have an agenda in place. Whether you do it in person or remote is up to you. You can do it successfully both ways. If you're in person, you want to make sure that you have all the materials, the whiteboard, sticky notes, Sharpies. I use dot stickers. And I also have some method for timing. And if you're remote, make sure that you adjust the agenda in order to give more breaks because nobody wants to sit in a chair for 4 hours. And then you also want to make sure you have the right tool. So you could use Mural, you can use Miro, FigJam, whatever your choice of sticky note programs is. And when you do this, you want to make sure that you set those rules, build the rapport. When you're going through it, make sure that you ask everybody to put their phones to the side. Make sure that they have you have their full attention. And when you're building that rapport, your whole goal is to make people feel safe. So starting with an icebreaker is really helpful. Now, when you run the exercises, you're going to run it like you would run a whiteboard, like affinity diagram session. You're going to start with a question, and you're going to get everybody to write one idea per sticky note, and then you're going to have them put it up on the board. You'll collect the ideas. You'll have them, spend a few minutes on each question, put the ideas up on the board, and then organize them so you can start to see patterns. Where are people coming together? And then ask them to label it for you. And then finally, what you're going to do is you're going to decide which one is the most important one to move forward with. So once you've done that, you can repeat for each question. So here's a few examples of ones that I've done with teammates. A lot of them have been online. And these are definitely going to help you build alignment. I do want to make sure that I have enough time for questions. So feel free to pop them in. And while you're doing that, I'm going to just kind of run through the benefits here. So all the voices are heard. It's modeling positive behavior for everyone. And what you're doing is you're getting a commitment over agreement. And this is really helpful for those stakeholders that could be troublesome down the road. When they're asked to contribute, this helps increase their status. They feel much better about it. They can see the big picture from here, which increases their certainty. And it's part of team building, so they feel related to the process. So it helps. All these things can help you understand how you can relate better and build more alignment with your stakeholders. Um, we covered everything on my agenda today. We talked about the SCARF model. We talked about methods for aligning with stakeholders, and I would love to take your questions if you have any.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Cindy. I really enjoyed that because I've felt that a few times the challenges with tough stakeholders. So it's a great way of kind of breaking it down and thinking about it in different kind of ways instead of going the traditional human route of just not thinking they were a nice person.
Right? That's what we do. If you break it down, you're like, oh yeah.
Excellent. So,
Awesome.
so yeah, please do enter your questions in whichever platform you're in. I'll keep an eye on them. But I did have one question, and something jumped to my mind, and particularly when you were talking about status. I had a difficult client or a stakeholder, and the challenge was they had designed the process, and we were coming in and changing it. And I tried all of that of inclusion and stuff, but they fundamentally disagreed with what we were doing. And they were like, no, the way I've done it is right. And yeah, I couldn't convince them otherwise. Even when I showed data of us getting progress and how it was working, because I guess it was attacking their status. So what would you do there where, yeah.
That is the hardest one. This is where I think the technique of guiding someone so they come up with the suggestion is probably one. It's the hardest thing to do, but it's probably going to be the most successful because from their point of view, they're perfect. Everything is there is fine, and no matter what you say, you're not going to convince them otherwise. Only when they've come up with the idea that, oh yeah, we could really improve there, that's when things will start to change. So some thoughtful questions that could maybe, get someone going in that direction without actually leading them, because they'll be able to spot a leading question, from a mile away. But if, even with the data, if there's just, I think it's building rapport, and I think it's just helping them come to the realization on their own that something has to change. That's when it's going to be okay. And that's the hard thing to do.
Yeah, I unfortunately didn't succeed in convincing them. We just had to go ahead with them constantly niggling at our heels and trying to stop us.
Yeah, no, I wish I had an answer, but it's good to recognize what was going on with that relationship. And, sometimes you're not going to win, but I would say that, maybe the next time you'll be able to align with a stakeholder a little bit better.
Great. Well, thank you very much. So yeah, do send in some questions. We don't have any more time now, but if you do pass through any questions or think of anything, we'll post them on the Slack group and ask Cindy to answer there. So thank you very much, Cindy. So up next, we have Heloisa, who will be talking about the advantages of functional programming with Clojure. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Heloisa.
Hello. Thanks
Hi.
so much. Hello, everyone. I'm Heloisa. I'm a software engineering at Nubank, and today I brought a very different topic for this environment. Let's say like this, which are the advantages of functional programming with Clojure. And this is not going to be like a very technical talk. I want to approach this in a more business way. So how you would choose like a programming language for the company, why you'd choose like a functional programming language for a company. And I want to focus in Clojure, which is the language that I have been in touch for the past 3 years, and it's a language that I think nowadays it's probably my favorite one. And I think it's something that the environment of IT should take a look more close, because it's something that has been like helping a lot. And to understand those advantages, there are a few things that we need to know about functional programming, because as you might know, there are a few different languages nowadays. Actually, there are a lot of them, but most part of them follow different protocols, let's say like this. But they follow different paradigms, which are different ways to solve problems. So they have like different approaches, and normally we choose programming language to try to solve something that language might be better. So when we are talking about functional programming, we also have a few guidelines and concepts of implementation that those languages that follow this protocol have some like benefits, and try to use it to have like a better approach in solving like testing and debugging. And they are like what we seek with functional programming. So the first thing is that we seek services that are going to be totally mutable. So we won't have like variables changing over time, because in that way we are totally able to have control over the code. Because, for example, nowadays one of the most used programming language at the market is Java, which is oriented objected programming language, and it doesn't follow the immutability protocol. So sometimes it's really hard for you to debug problems when you're having them, because you don't have like control of what's happening in the whole process of the service. And with functional programming, we do try to have it like the best that we can. And also, as the name already says, functional programming, the idea is to try to split our problems in function situations. So in what way I can split my problems here to try to put them in small functions that are going to be totally testable, because in that way we're going to have like a high coverage to the scenarios that our service is going like to apply. And also we try to have pure functions. We might understand pure functions as mathematical functions. So if you have like an x that is something, the result is always going to be the exactly y that you have. So you're totally able to predict what this function is doing and the return that is going to give you based in the inputs that you have. So those concepts really help us to have like a high concise idea in the programming language. And also we seek functions composition. So we normally think about the problems as a composition of functions that we might apply to this problem. And what is different from other paradigms as well is that normally in functional programming, we seek recursions over loops when we need to iterate over a collection. So we don't have like for each situations. We always use like recursion over the collection. And also we prefer expressions over statements. Expressions we might understand as the example of the mathematical function in which you always have like a result for the inputs that you gave. And the statements, which are the things that we try to avoid, are functions that don't have a result. So for example, if you have like a function that do like many calls to like a step-by-step thing, and you don't have like anything being returned, just a void, this function is a statement. So in functional programming, we try to have only expressions in our way of doing things, because in that way, it's easier for us to know exactly what's happening during the whole programming situation, execution time. And there are a few things as well that we try to avoid. And they are totally related with the things that I mentioned. So we avoid as much as we can the shared states. So we don't want to have like variables being mutated over time, change it, and being used like without control. So this is something that we truly try to not use. If there is like a scenario in which you need, maybe you are totally able to do it, but it's not really recommended. And also, we try to avoid side effects. For those that don't know exactly what are side effects are everything that goes outside of a service. So, for example, an error being thrown, a print to the screen, a connection to a database, an HTTP call to other service, and so on. All those things are side effects. Of course, our services will need to have side effects, but with functional programming, we at least try to separate it in the best way that we can, because in that way we will have like this more accurate service being created. So after telling you all those concepts that we try to have with functional programming, just to clarify a bit the idea, I want to deep dive more in Clojure and what it is the difference of Clojure to the other language, and why it would be nice to implement it and how to implement it in a company. But to start, I think it's nice just to know a little bit about the history, because this is something that is normally really common for you to know the history of the language. But in this case, I think it's really important because it makes like the foundation of what Clojure it is. So it is a really young programming language. So it was released in 2007 by Rich Hickey. And this functional programming was created to be designed to be a general purpose, practical functional programming language, which would be suitable for any professional in which the host language was Java. And how we would do this, right? So Clojure is built in the top of the JVM, which is the Java virtual machine. So the environment that runs Java, for example. So to have a functional programming language running in this environment is something that allows not only someone that wants to learn this language to use it, but anyone that has this JVM already configured and had an infrastructure created, so it's really easy for you to start using. So this idea of having it is to bring functional programming language more close to the market, because nowadays this has been changing in the past few years, but it's still like a few number of companies that use functional programming language, mostly because in the past functional programming was only an academic idea. So normally we just like used functional programming language at college, at courses when we wanted to do so. It wasn't even in the syllables of the graduation, for example. So with this idea of having Clojure closer to a Java environment, this brought a more easily way for people to try to use it without having to do it by themselves, because it was going to be like much easier. So this was one of the fundamentals idea for the conception of this programming language, and it also is an open source, so you're totally able to have access to the code and modify it if you want, and do collaboration to it. And it follows the Lisp dialect. The Lisp dialect is the grammar of the functional programming language, and Lisp was the first functional programming language created in the academic world. And it was like a programming language created to solve problems with lists. So that's why the name Lisp dialect. And it has like a really different style of grammar because it has like many parentheses. So Clojure follows this idea. So at first sight, it's really weird to see how it is like structured, the coding part, but it's really easy for you to understand how things are done. And it's really simple as far as you have like just to understand how the things are put there. You're totally able to read it and programming, and it is really, really fast to teach others to use it. And Richie has done some modifications in this Lisp dialect just to make it more understandable with some like more additions. But in the most, it follows this dialect, which is really good because there are many other programming languages that follow as well. So now I want to get to a use case of how we would use Clojure and why a company would choose to use Clojure, right? So what are the benefits and the advantages that it would have to make it like choose to use a so different and not so usual programming language? So the first thing is that Clojure is really objective. So you don't have to have like many lines of code to have something running and doing like stuff. As Java has like a really verbose programming style, Clojure is totally different and it's much more direct to the point. So it's really fast to have things running. So this is a really good advantage of it. And the other thing that I think it's one of the most important, not only for developers, but also to the company itself and to the business level, which is that we have like an outstanding task coverage with this language. And what I want to say with that, right? So as we have those ideas implemented of so pure functions and being able to predict everything that is happening, you're totally able to have a high coverage of test unity, integration tasks, and so on in the service. And you might have like an almost full coverage in a single microservice. And in that way, you're not only guaranteeing the quality of that service, but also guaranteeing the quality assurance of that. So sometimes we saw companies having like separated teams of quality assurance to validate and see if what has been done it's okay. And when you have like a language that by itself has the principle of doing it as its like main status, this thing might change flow. For example, at Nubank, we don't have a separated team to do the quality assurance. We only have the services being tested by themselves. So the developers are able to do like the full coverage of testing much more precisely and with indirect to the point without much effort. So it's easier and very good to the company that don't have to waste money to have like more people working in different chapters. So this is something really, really nice. And other thing is that as it is built in the top of the JVM, as I mentioned, it has full interoperability with Java. So we are totally able to use all the libraries available to Java, all the things that are already done. So you have like direct interoperability. So you're totally able to just import there and use. You don't have like to do like a difficult thing. So this is quite useful as well. And also it has like a strong community, and it's very easy for you to get tutorials, understand things, and ask questions, because all the community is really receptive and able to do it, to talk to you if you need. So this is quite good. And how we would use Clojure in a company, right? I think this part we can take a look not only to Clojure, but at any programming language that a company would choose. So how it would use the language itself. So the first thing, I think, in my opinion, is if you want to use like a microservices architecture, as it is like the most used today and that has the more reliability, the first thing is to decide the language and use a single language to most parts of your microservices. So I would say that to have like around 90% of microservices using the same language, so in my case Clojure, would be like the best scenario, because in that way you're totally able to have like a single infrastructure being created and evolved over time. So you don't have like to decide, oh, now I'm going to use Java, now I'm going to use Python, now I'm going to use other functional programming language. And when you have like many different languages, it's really hard for you to have control over the infrastructure. So you're not able to automate many things. So when you have like a single programming language, this is much more easier, and you might evolve the whole scenario as a single thing. So this is something really good to do. So to choose a language and follow it for the whole idea, only when it's extremely necessary to use a different one. And other thing is to have a predefined architecture for the microservice that you're going to build. So imagine a scenario in which the company has scaled so much that you have like more than 100 microservices being created. And if you don't have like a defined architecture, it's really hard for you to be able to do maintenance, to change people when you need, and do those things. So for example, with Clojure, the Diplomat architecture is an architecture that is really nice to use. I will talk more about it like in a single moment, but this is something that I think it's really useful for all the developers to be able to act, to work in a more precisely way and in a more faster way as well, because you don't need to take time understanding what's happening, as all the microservices follow the same structure. And also, when you have this whole infrastructure created through a single programming language, we might be able to include continuous delivery, which is the idea of coding, testing, and doing the validations and put it direct to production. So this I will talk more as well, but all those things are things that you might do to have it running at the company. And when I talk about the Diplomat architecture, this is a known architecture. So hexagonal architecture is a very well-known architecture for microservice, which follows this idea of ports and adapters. So it has like the idea of having an anti-corruption layer scenario to avoid breaking chains in services. But the Diplomat architecture is pretty much the hexagonal architecture with two levels of business logic in the part of the context. So what I want to say is that it has like one more step inside this idea of hexagonal architecture. So how I would do it in Clojure, I would have like this structure of a project in which I would have this Diplomat, which was going to be the authorization part to negotiate on behalf of the service. So everything that needs to be negotiated, so things that are arriving to the service, HTTP calls that are arriving, HTTP calls that I'm sending to other service, events and the message part if you use it. So all those things would be handled by this Diplomat part. And we would have like input and output to those ports. So the ideas of ports are all those connections that the microservice would have to the outside world with other microservices or other infrastructures. And we also would have a predefined external schema. So we would have like a contract, a defined contract to those ports. And we would also have another internal schema, which would be our internal model, which is like the model that the context knows. So they are different because we need to have this part of encryption layer, which are the adapters, to change from the external schemas to the internal schemas to guarantee that these scenarios wouldn't like break if something changes inside of our context of the service. And also we would have this more internal part that is inside of the internal model, which is the controllers. And this is like the first level of business logic, and would not only have this adaptations being performed there, but also would have all the interactions with other things. So if I need to have like a connection to a database or to ask things, this is where I would do this interaction. So here the side effects would be all concise implemented, because as I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation about the ideas of not trying to avoid the side effects, so here would be the place in where we would put all the side effects to be able to handle them in an integration test way. And to finalize, I would have the pure logics, which would be the exactly idea of having a function being created extremely pure. So with an X that I gave, I would have the exactly Y that I was expecting. So the idea of pure mathematical functions. And the continuous delivery would be done with the coding of the programming language, the microservice. Then I would do like testing, unit testing, in integration tests. The integration tests, for those that don't know, I know that I talked about it, is to try to predict all the side effects that the service is generating. So as we try to avoid the side effects, we at least need to have like control over them. So if I want this service to be connecting to the database and updating a table, I want to be able to check that this was done precisely well. And also, if I'm sending an event to other microservices, I want to be able to guarantee that this message has been created and sent. So the integration test is a test done to validate those side effects. And the unit testing is a more Unitarian style in which you're able to test function by function. So when you have like everything done, you're able to put it like in a repository, for example, GitHub, in which would have like a CI running. So it would run all the tests that this microservice has, would like validate contracts, would have the whole infrastructure already configured there. And in that way, we would be able to have someone outside of yourself, like another coworker, that would validate and see if things are okay and in the code conventions that you follow. And after approving, we would build the microservice thing, and we would deploy it. And after that, it would be already delivered and available to everyone to use. So this is the idea of continuous delivery, that it's quite useful to be done. And with Clojure, it's really easy as well. And with any with any programming language, it's easy. And it's something that if you follow that idea of having your infrastructure with a single programming language, it's something that it's like helps a lot to everyone, to the company and to the developers. And as I'm talking about a very different programming language, when you decide to use like something like that in a company, how you onboard people, right? Because it's difficult to hire people that know it, right? But as Clojure is a very simple language, it's easy to onboard engineers. But there are a few things that I think might be used to any programming language as well that help to do it. So the first thing is self-service online course, as nowadays it's really useful for anyone that wants to learn. It's something to start. It's a good thing, but I would say that the most important thing when you want to have like onboarded engineers truly doing hands-on activities, I think mob programming is the best thing that a company could do to teach engineers in anything that they need. And how does it work, right? So it's similar to a pair programming. I'm not sure if you have heard about the more programming, but it's very similar to a pair programming, in which you have like a group of engineers doing a task, a single task together, and they normally switch places. So after 5 to 10 minutes, they go switching places of who is coding, and they all of them give ideas of how to solve the problem, how to do it. And when you have like a new programming language to teach, this is like a very good idea, because you might have like someone from the company that already know how to do it, so I already know Clojure very well. So there is like a single person that knows Clojure, but all the others are able to solve problems, right? So they give the ideas of the problem, of how they want to solve the problem, and this person that knows the language teach them how to do it in Clojure, and they program it by themselves. So they do hands-on activities, and this is something that allows people to truly understand what's happening, and it's really useful. And I think this is even very nice to do it at the teams itself, because it like shares the knowledge and increases the process of learning much more than like a single self-service online course. And other thing that I think it's really useful is to have a buddy, because sometimes when the person is new to the company, it's really hard to do questions to others. So when you have like a predefined person from who you might be able to do the questions, it's more like smoothie to do these questions, because it's easier for you. You're not like even if it is like a simple question, you're not going to be so ashamed of asking. So this is something I think really useful to do as well. And also to have this person integrated to the team from the very beginning, because then it's going like to do pairings with the others, do more programmings with them, and in this way, with like tasks and hands-on activity, it's going to be like much faster. And just to summarize a few ideas about the Clojure and why I would choose Clojure to be used like in a company, the first thing is that it has an accelerated learning curve. So it's a really easy programming language, because it has like a simple grammar, and it's really fast for you to learn how to do it and start like developing a service by yourself. I might say for experience that, for example, when I did an exercise to enter the company that I am today, I had like 2 weeks to choose a functional programming language at that point, and make like a program. And I chose Clojure because I didn't know like any functional programming language at that time, and I decided to do it, and I was able to do it like in a week. So with like a restless API and so on. So it's really fast, even if you're like by yourself. So this allows us to learn a lot in Clojure and evolve with time. And this is something really, really good. And also it has like an amazing community and documentation. So you're totally able to find many examples over the internet and ask questions if you need. And the tutorials are quite good. So different from other languages, I think Clojure has like an extremely well done documentation, because you don't have like many descriptions. You have the descriptions, but they are direct to the point, and also you have like so many examples that it's much more easily for you to take a look and see, oh, it's exactly this that I need, not only by the idea being right. So this is quite good. And if I have to recommend something, I would say to start with this magnificent book, which is The Clojure for the Brave and True, that has a really simple didactic with a very smooth of thought. So it's quite nice and a good point of start. And make Clojure be ever in your favor and functional programming in your life. Thank you so much for watching this presentation. Now I'm open to questions if you have as well. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. I I had a question, but you were answering it about particularly around the side effects, because that's my biggest problem with functional programming. It's perfect in theory, but then the real world comes and starts trying to mess with it. Um,
Yes, it's really, this is something I think that it's really hard to predict in any programming language, but with Clojure, if you use like a good architecture, it's easier for you at least to put it like in a single place and do the testing over it to make it more like precise.
And I guess I'll throw out just, I have one question, and then, but if anybody else does have questions, please do post them in. One of the criticisms I've heard of hexagonal architecture is it adds a lot of overhead and a lot of, like, so instead of having maybe a very simple thing, now you've got files everywhere, and you've got, it just adds a lot of boilerplate and a lot of complexity. So what would be your kind of comeback to that?
I think it has like you had to create like many files, and sometimes like you lose control of how many things you're doing, if any, and if you are truly following the idea of the hexagonal architecture itself. But I think the good thing is that at least you have the exactly same names for the things. So, for example, if I need to change an engineering for a team to the other because they are much more needing, because that project is much more urgent than the ones that we are here. It's much easier if you follow the same architecture than if like anyone like decide what to do, you know. So even though you have like all those files being created, and sometimes that they don't make like much sense, sometimes it's better to do it in that way than to have like everyone doing they want like in a simpler way, because sometimes what's simpler for you might not be as simple to the other. So to have like a predefined architecture might help in a way as well, even though it has like many files being created.
Excellent. No, it's a good counter argument. Well, that brings us to the end of our time. So just want to say thank you once again. That was a really interesting chat, and I hope everybody out there enjoyed it as well.
Thank you.
So that brings us to the end of our event for this evening. But if you did enjoy it, please do consider joining us at UXDX USA, which is in New York in May. And we're bringing together product, UX design, and dev. So there today we had very much a kind of a team management product style talk about how you manage your stakeholders, and then a dev focused talk. So the purpose of why we bring everybody together is because it takes a team to build a product. So there's no point learning separately if then you have to come back to the office and work together. So what you can expect is 25 speakers covering all different kind of product UX design and dev topics. There'll be 8 hands-on workshops, be about 500 attendees attending in a fantastic venue in New York, where we can finally get back together and meet one another once again. So if you are interested, we'll be sending out a 10% discount code for having attended the event today. And yeah, look forward to catching you again either at the conference there or at the next UXDX online event. Thank you very much.